Hello, I'm Nick Stone. I'm the conference producer at ARK Group, and I'm here today to talk about the GDPR event that we're doing for the professional services around risk and compliance, and in particular event that we're doing in November, the 14th of November. Delighted to introduce Mark Lubbuck, partner at Brown Rudnick. And Mark, we're going to be seeing at the event, the GDPR event, on the 14th of November. Mark's going to be talking a little bit about some of the GDPR challenges that we're currently facing and some of the things we'll be discussing at the event. Now, my first question is around the issues of clarity, particularly, Mark, in data retention, transparency and accountability. Mark, where do you think some of those issues are at the moment?
Okay, can I take that in two parts? First, data retention, and then second, accountability and transparency. So on data retention, that is a big issue for professional service firms, and the reason is that professional service firms like nothing better than keeping data. So they have enormous amounts of it, and the regulation says that you should only keep data for as long as you need it for the purposes for which you collected it. And so that means that lots of data that professional service firms is redundant and should be got rid of, and that is a process that will need to be undertaken by professional service firms, and that will not be straightforward and may not be cheap. They will have to go through all the back data and decide what should be kept and what shouldn't, and that will be a big IT problem. On accountability and transparency, that's more of an ongoing issue for law firms, and that will involve changing their business processes, having new procedures in place so that at any given moment, imagine a regulator turning up at your door and showing that you have the ability to show what you've been doing with your data, and also that people who you deal with, the data subjects, your clients and others, know what's happening to their data. The accountability and transparency, that means remodeling your business processes, and I think that's going to be quite difficult for a lot of professional service firms.
That issue around clarity leads to my next point about steering a course between a softer opt-in approach, an opt-in approach, and a softer approach on where we should be when we're doing our direct marketing. What's your thinking on that with the new regulations, Mark?
Well, direct marketing is interesting because there is not a conflict, but there's overlapping regulation in the area. There's first of all the data protection regulation, the law on data protection that went before it, and there's also the privacy in electronic communications regulations, PECA. And although the general data protection regulation came out roughly when it was expected to, and is obviously now in force, the equivalent for privacy in electronic communications regulation is not. That's still held up. So we don't quite know what the right position is. But one thing is evident, which is that it's going to be harder to rely on what was called a soft opt-in. And professional service firms will need to take great care in making sure that they stay the right side of the line. One of the issues with, of course, professional service firms is that many of the personal data contacts are direct contacts of the partners and associates working at these firms. But that helps, I think, from a soft opt-in perspective. Although if you are the sort of partner who turns up at a new firm with 4,000 contacts, you can't possibly know 4,000 people unless you're a very unless you have a lot of friends, and so you probably need to cull that list to people you genuinely have dealt with recently and you do know well. And I think if you do that, then I think the soft opt-in, you can still rely on legitimate interests.
Mark, my last question, my third question, is for law and accountancy services and where they should be appointing a data protection officer. What's your thinking around DPO appointments?
Yeah, this is a difficult issue, I think, for professional service firms because they're advising on a day-to-day basis on data protection, and therefore they think they probably do need a data protection officer because if you haven't got one, then are you actually in the right place to advise on that issue and other data protection issues. But I do think that firms need to be careful about that. The regulation is quite relatively specific about when you appoint data protection officers, and there's three circumstances, one of which is most likely to apply, and that is where the core activity of the business consists of the regular and systematic monitoring of data subjects on a large scale. So you have to ask yourself whether your business is doing that, and there will be examples where the business isn't doing that. There will be examples where the business is clearly doing that, and there will be examples where bits of the business is doing it and other bits don't. And you need to work out whether you need to apply the DPO in those circumstances. It's going to be easier for the larger firms, obviously, because of all the baggage that comes with having a data protection officer, more difficult for the smaller firms, and that's why I think people should think carefully about whether it is a core activity, whether there is regular and systematic monitoring, and whether it's carried out on a large scale. And for a lot of firms, that won't be the case. And so I typically would advise smaller professional service firms not to go down that path. In addition, I'd make the point that if you have a compliance officer, and I think everybody should have a compliance officer in charge of data, but if you call them a DPO, then the general view is that that person is a DPO as defined in the regulation with all the baggage that I mentioned earlier. And so I would try and avoid calling them data protection officers if you possibly can. It sounds silly, but that seems to be the position.
Mark, thanks very much indeed for coming in today and spending a little bit of time on where you think some of those GDPR issues. You'll be seeing Mark Lubbock at our GDPR for Professional Services event on the 14th of November. Mark, big thanks to you, and we look forward to seeing you at the event.